think when you run an employee advocacy program, you're always thinking about the content. The content's number one on your mind. Do I have enough content? Is the cadence okay? Are people sharing the content? And we know that the importance of employee advocacy has risen considerably. We started with a new tool 2 years ago, so we haven't had any formal training in 2 years. I realised it was time to prioritise that. At the end of last year, I issued communication, which was the first. I thanked everyone for taking part in the program in 2025, and I shared some of the top line metric. That was really interesting because we had one individual who was number 2 reach out, and he was like, "Oh, I can't believe I lost out to my colleague." So there was nice to see that bit of competition.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Lewis Gray. For this episode, Elliot Elsley joins as co-host, and we have Camilla Erika Campbell from Wood joining as our special guest. Now, Wood, for anyone unfamiliar, is a global consulting, engineering and operations company within the materials and energy markets. Camilla is the social media lead there, where she oversees their employee advocacy program, among many other things. In this conversation, we spoke about why Camilla is focusing on people and program engagement right now. We discussed why getting employees to personalize provided posts is one of the most important employee advocacy challenges to overcome. And naturally, we spoke about how Camilla is doing exactly that. We even discussed using data to determine what content is provided to employees and why Wood treats employee advocacy as a strategic channel rather than a social media add-on. There's a really great start in there that should immediately make it clear why employee advocacy is a leading strategy right now, but I'll leave it to Camilla to explain towards the back of this episode. So without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Camilla Erika Campbell. Okay, so firstly, Camilla, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Do you mind just introducing yourself and your role for our listeners, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me along today as well. So my name's Camilla Erika Campbell. I am the social media lead at Wood. Wood is a global consulting, engineering and operations company within the energy and materials markets. I've been at Wood for just over 3 years now. Prior to that, I worked in higher education. My role at Wood is obviously social media lead, responsible for the strategy of social media and also employee advocacy. And I've been working in social media for just over 11 years in total.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And just to give our listeners context for this episode and the things that we're going to be talking about, could you just provide a kind of brief overview of your employee advocacy program and, whether that's the scale or whatever it might be, but just for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So when I joined Wood 3 years ago, they already had a program in place and a tool in place. So I inherited that. And I probably took the first year to really get to grips with it. We were naturally coming to the end of the contract with that particular platform that we were using. So I took that as an opportunity to see what else was out there. And as part of that, I decided I wanted to change. So 2 years ago, we moved to another tool, but that also then required me to migrate about 400 users to a new tool, which I was a little bit nervous about because they were so used to using, our previous tool. So there was a lot of internal communications. There was a training session put on as well. And as I've said, that's been over 2 years now. And it was a great opportunity to just re-educate and reinvigorate them as well at that point. And then I guess over the last 2 years, we've been, thinking about the content. We've made a few changes in terms of how things have been structured. And then this year, as I mentioned to you before, my focus is really on education and communication with our advocates themselves.
I love to hear that. Yeah. And that's kind of where I wanted to start the conversation, to be honest with you, is just going into where your focus is for this year or just currently with the program, because like you said, you're a couple of years into this journey now. You've gone through that migration, which we'll definitely get into, I think, at some point. But you mentioned in our conversation leading up to this podcast that your focus this year is more around people rather than content. So what was it that led you to that realization?
I think when you run an employee advocacy program, you're always thinking about the content. The content's number one on your mind. Do I have enough content? Is the cadence okay? Are people sharing the content? So I think sometimes it's maybe easy to not forget about your advocates, but they're maybe on the back burner from content. There's also obviously been a lot of changes in recent years. The LinkedIn algorithm, we know that our corporate pages are struggling to be seen in feeds, and we know that the importance of employee advocacy has risen considerably. So it just made sense to touch base with the advocates, really educate them on why we're putting so much effort into this, and educate them on not just the changes that are happening, wider, but what we're doing within the tool. So we've had some changes within the business. So we've been structuring things a little bit differently. I also realized that I could probably do with communicating with them on a more regular basis. As I said, we started with a new tool 2 years ago. So we haven't had any formal training in 2 years. Anyone that's new that has joined since does get a getting started guide where they get led through how to onboard, how to start sharing, and some best practice. But other than that, we haven't really been actively engaging with them. So I realized for a lot of different reasons, it was time to prioritize that. And as I said, my focus this year is really the education, the guidance, and also the communication with them as well.
With the communication that you're thinking about, is that going to be kind of results focused? Something I've seen a lot of people do is actually employees don't see the wider kind of impact of employee advocacy. They perhaps see their own, and their own likes go up, down, left and right. But is that something that's kind of on the roadmap there?
Yes. So at the end of last year, I issued a communication, which was the first. And that's exactly what I did. So I thanked everyone for taking part in the program in 2025. And I shared some of the top line metrics. So, for example, the earned media value, and explained what that meant to them because they maybe don't understand what that means. I also celebrated some of our top performers as well. So, who's been sharing, who's been getting the most engagement. That was really interesting because we had one individual who was number 2 reach out, and he was like, "Oh, I can't believe I lost out to my colleague." So there was nice to see that bit of competition. Since then, it's been more about the educational sessions. So I ran some sessions back in March. And then my plan is going forward is to build on that. And again, keep sharing the impact that they're making, and just sharing, best practice guidance as well, to keep them warm, and, hopefully to keep the program moving forward.
And do those comms go out exclusively to advocates, or do they go out to the wider business as well?
They go out exclusively to advocates. So we do it over email, but then within our employee advocacy tool, we have the ability to upload internal communications and notifications as well. So put it in a few different places. I'm having a think about other channels that I can use to make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can. But at the moment, we're focusing on the advocates. However, the plans for this year I have in terms of developing a resource bank that will be not only for advocates, but for the wider business, because although we have about 500 seats, we have a company that's 33,000 people wide. So I want to make sure that even if you can't get a seat within our employee advocacy platform, you still have all the tools and best practice advice to go ahead and share what you're doing on LinkedIn.
I think that's always the really tricky part for businesses of your size when you've got 30,000 employees, because a really nice thing to be able to do would be able to communicate all of those results to the whole business and let people come kind of registering their interest or registering directly to the platform. And I think some of the clients that we work with, they have that kind of fortunate nature that they can do that, and 500 seats is not going to be a cap for them essentially at that point. Do you see that being, is that budget and value in the business versus sort of actually wanting to contain advocacy? If you could have 5,000 people signed up, would you?
Yeah, I think from a budgetary point of view, we'll have to demonstrate the value. So it's not like we're going to go from 500 seats to 5,000. However, I'm knowing the changes in the landscape and the increasing importance of employee advocacy, being able to then showcase that data to senior leaders, then I'd be hopeful that we could put a case to grow on that. But at the moment, we aren't at 500. So it's a case of demonstrating how we're doing with our current advocates, and then looking to grow from there.
That's great to hear. And I always love the ambition when people are constantly thinking about future growth. I think there's definitely a tendency and a temptation to maybe get comfortable when you start seeing good results and you have your little group of advocates that, you're effective at managing. But I love the idea to constantly go bigger, especially when we're talking about results as well. Quick one. If you've ever wondered how your employee advocacy efforts are actually performing and not just what you think is happening, Disseminate offers a free employee advocacy health check. All you have to do is provide your company name and our team will pull real social data on how active your employees are, what impact it's having, and then how you stack up against your chosen competitors. So whether you're assessing the performance of your employee advocacy program or getting a benchmark for a future program, these will be the insights you can act on. The link's in the show notes. Something that I wanted to touch on, Camilla, is the education sessions that you're going through with your advocates. You mentioned that there were a number of reasons that made you want to focus on this year. I'd love to know what they are, but then also, what did these training sessions cover, and I guess what were you hoping employees would take away from the sessions?
So it all started with the 2 sessions that I ran back in March. It was just the right time to reconnect with our users. And I ran 2 global sessions and invited all 400 plus advocates. We had around 200 people come, which 50% I think was quite good. We also had people join that didn't even have an account, just through word of mouth and speaking to colleagues. So I'm loving the passion. The sessions themselves were really well engaged. I had a lot of questions, and then people have been reaching out to me off the back of that as well to discuss maybe some ideas that they have or some concerns that they have. So that was really useful. We covered a lot of different content within there. As I said, it has been probably a few years since we had that training on such a scale. So the first thing I started off with was just sharing the social media landscape as a whole, what's happening with the LinkedIn algorithm, but also really talking about employee advocacy through the lens of why it benefits them. I think that's really important. You want to get their buy-in. If you just go in and say, this is great for Wood to share all this content, they might be a bit more resistant. So if you can really share the benefits to an individual, helping build their personal brand, then you're going to get more buy-in. So that was something that I covered. I also went into some of the key challenges that I've seen just from talking to people, but also talking to my marketing communication colleagues. I sit within the marketing communications team, so I work very closely with them, and they're very well connected with some of the advocates that use the platform. So just hearing feedback, we know from just seeing the results that personalization is one of our key points that we need to address. I know that that's a common thing that a lot of people face a challenge with. So I went and just spoke to them about why you would personalize your content and the impact that it would have. The fact that it will be seen as more authentic, you're more likely to get better engagement, and then shared a few ideas on how you could personalize your posts and a couple of examples as well. But as I said, that was just a little taster. I'll definitely be including that in my follow-up resources that I'll be developing. The other thing that I did in the session was I got feedback from some of our advocates. I wanted to hear the impact that the program had made with them, and it was great to hear the different answers that were coming back. So one person said that they found the platform really useful just to understand what was going on within the company and different regions, and I'd never actually considered that as a positive that could come out of being part of the program. Then we had other people saying that it had resulted in conversations with clients, or that they had the confidence to share some key messages to their particular market as well as touching upon some of the features like the app that people can use. So having those quotes was really useful. And it also, I guess, from their point of view, it had that more authentic lens. It wasn't just me coming in from marketing and communications saying, do this. It was being backed up, thankfully, by the advocates themselves.
I think this is something I notice in the kind of maturity stage with advocacy programs as well. What you've described is so much more lined to best practice. How do we do this really well? typically when people first start an advocacy program, and perhaps I'm being biased here and thinking back too many years, but there was a lot of how-tos in the initial training sessions for a lot of users. This is how you press the share button. This is how you choose a caption. This is how you schedule your content. And I think these days software is so much easier to use, so much more sort of obvious by that nature, that doing the best practice and actually the platform that you're using should just kind of make that really slick and really simple for people to do, that you don't need to explain it. But do you find that change has happened as well in the business? It's less about this is how you post to LinkedIn and much more why you post to LinkedIn.
We do have users with such an array of experience. Some of these people have been on the platform for a couple of years and are really confident using it. So it is more about sharing those best practice to just help elevate what they're already doing. But for some people, it is back to the basics. I don't tend to cover the how to because I have quite a comprehensive guide that I can share out. And whenever I communicate, I'm always here if you want to reach out and if you have any challenges, and people do. But I wanted to make sure with these sessions that even if you were really experienced and confident, you still went away with some tips. And then obviously for the people that were new or the people that joined and never had an account, then they feel confident to start using it. What I will say is, off the back of doing those sessions, I recorded them. They were sent out to all advocates, so all 400 people received them, as well as the slides. And what I have been doing since then is been following up individually with all of our advocates that have maybe not been so active for a while, just to say, hey, you didn't attend the training. We've got these great resources. If you want to have a chat, then let's get something in the calendar. Or for some people, it may be that it's just not a focus for them anymore. They don't want to use that. And equally, that's valid. Good to know that, so we can free up the account for someone else. So I've been doing that for the last few weeks. It's been quite time consuming, but I've deliberately been reaching out to people individually rather than en masse, because I think you're more inclined to get back to someone if someone's reached out to you individually. And it's also an opportunity for me to let them know that I am a dedicated resource within social for Wood, and they can always reach out to me with anything, whether it's social media or employee advocacy.
So, Camilla, I did want to bring it back to the personalization thing, because this is something that's come up time and again on the podcast. And it's something that we get a lot of feedback on, because it seems to be a part of managing an advocacy program that a number of people struggle with. And for the listeners' sake, when we're talking about this, we're talking about the role of the advocate to tweak a post that's been provided to them. So obviously we make it easy by providing employees with posts, and it's then on them to then tweak it and make it their own, so they're not just sharing copied posts. But Camilla, from your side at the moment, how are you approaching that? So how are you communicating the value of personalization, maybe for people who are uncertain about what to share and things like that?
I've definitely come across a lot of people that maybe just don't understand. We obviously work with employee advocacy day in, day out. We understand why, but for a lot of people, they maybe think, well, you've uploaded the content to the platform, you've put up a couple of different messages. Why should I change the content already? So it's starting from scratch and educating them on why you want to do it, the benefits of personalizing the content. Certainly I'm a visual learner. I think it's a lot easier to help people understand what you mean when you show examples. So being able to share good examples of other people within the business that have taken a post and tweaked it ever so slightly, whether that's just putting it in their own words or adding their own reflection. It could even be that if it's an article that they're sharing, maybe highlighting, the key points that they find really interesting. I know that a lot of people, when they think about posting on LinkedIn, it can be a barrier because they just don't know what to say, or they're worried about what they can say. So I would say with the training that I want to do this year, personalization is probably number one on my agenda, because I definitely want to see by the end of the year an uptake in the number of people that are taking that time to personalize their posts. And if I can start to share what people are doing, the results it's having through these communications that I'm planning, then I'm hoping that it will just slowly start to build.
I think one of the interesting challenges with personalization, to your point, is, well, you've provided me a caption, so why wouldn't I just use that one? And then what I tend to see on the other side of things is if you provide people a caption that they don't like, they're much more inclined to tweak it, which is an awkward sort of dichotomy that you have. And Lewis, who manages our program quite a lot, will often put a lot of emojis into post captions, which for me is a big anti thing. I just don't particularly use them in any form of my life. So I will naturally always go and edit a post caption if it's got a load of emojis in it. So I wonder whether at times, providing content that is very, very tweakable for people, or content that people are going to want to change just because of the phrasing and those first 3 words they read and they go, I would say this in a completely different manner, is quite a valuable way of going about that? Or do you keep the captions that you have as the kind of corporate entity kind of captions and hope that people kind of tweak them?
It's a difficult one because you can almost see it. There will be people out there that will just keep sharing. So you want to make sure if they are doing that, then what they're sharing is, we're happy with what they're sharing. I definitely know on the emoji front, there's splits, we've tried putting some emojis in, and feedback has been that, people don't necessarily like them, but then we can add quite a few different variations when we upload content. So that's quite handy. It's it's going to be a journey this year, and I think I'll learn more as I try new things, and as we see what people end up doing. So it'll be interesting to see come the end of the year where we are with the personalization.
Just to give you a bit of insight into our program, Camilla, like Elliot said, I'll curate content for other people to share. I'll usually provide 6 or 7 captions or versions of copy that people can use, and one of them I'll write all of these in a Google Doc and things like that. But one of them, the 6th or 7th, the last one, always has Elliot style in brackets, and it will just be no emojis, lots of full stops, maybe a healthy dose of sarcasm as well. But do you know what? Talking about this now, I'm thinking maybe I need to make them, like you said, Elliot, as non-relatable as possible, because then I suppose it increases the likelihood of people sharing them. But definitely not advice I would give to everybody, but I think it potentially could work with me and you, Elliot. Something I found particularly insightful from our initial conversation, Camilla, was about the fact that you're using data to shape the content that you provide employees to share. You mentioned that you'd look closely at what they're sharing and not sharing, but out of curiosity, what trends have you noticed?
Well, we've definitely found that when it comes to contract wins, or when there's been a special milestone in a project or people-related content, then that gets shared quite often. People like that type of content. We have a mix of different people on our program. So we have subject matter experts, we have recruiters, we also have business development. So they all have, I guess, different thoughts about what they want to share. I've even seen some good success with some of the more technical articles that we have shared as well, going out through particular advocates, maybe more like the subject matter experts, because they have the right network. So you're getting good engagement on those, much better than we would say on the corporate LinkedIn page. So having a look at the data is quite important to be able to decide what is working, what's not working, what type of content. Is it graphics? Is it video as well? Is important to have a look at. But as well as looking at the stats on the platform itself, whenever we upload content that has links in it, we always have UTM tracking links so that we can then go onto Google, and then we can continue that journey and get a better understanding of where advocacy is referring traffic. And we've seen some great examples of where it has completely outperformed our corporate LinkedIn page.
And with some of that web traffic that you're tracking, are you tracking beyond just the referral numbers and the volume? Are you looking at bounce rates and engagement rates and pathing that goes beyond that?
Yeah, so I've looked at the engagement rates and the bounce rates, and generally we can see that we're getting really good quality traffic coming through from advocacy. It's almost on par with the search traffic that we're getting, and it's higher. It can be higher than LinkedIn. We've definitely seen in terms of the bounce rate that it has been lower as well. And as I said, we ran a campaign a few years ago for a UK graduate recruitment campaign, and the amount of traffic that we got from advocacy, as part of the campaign, we didn't just do advocacy, we did organic and paid social, but the advocacy traffic referred 13 times more traffic than our LinkedIn corporate page. And it actually accounted for 82% of our traffic overall, which I was like really surprised when I saw those statistics. But do you know what? Being able to share that with the wider team has been really valuable, and it's really helped elevate how we're using advocacy. So I guess 2 years ago, it was very much seen as an additional tool. It's a place where you take your LinkedIn posts and you pop it up onto advocacy so people can share, but it wasn't really seen as a platform in its own right. By being able to showcase some of the successes that we had with that graduate campaign, people are starting to understand, okay, this is a channel that we need to pay attention to. And it really has changed focus. And now the marketing teams are creating content specifically for advocacy as part of their campaigns. It's no longer a nice to have add-on.
I think a really interesting part of that is that, to your point, the content sort of specificity that comes with it, that you can target very particular audiences, subject matter experts that can share something that is pretty niche and nuanced by nature that you probably wouldn't put on the corporate page. And you get to see the impact of that. One that always comes to mind is employer brand content as well, which, when we talk about talent acquisition content, when you post that onto your corporate page, or actually when anybody shares it, to be honest as well, you may not get a lot of visible interaction on that. If people are looking for a job, they're not suddenly liking recruiters' posts, because they're often in a job, but you don't want to display that to your current employer. But then when you look at the click traffic, to your point, and you UTM track all of this, and you see that 82% of your traffic has come from employee posts, it may not even be that visible on the surface, but that background data, and this is why I think tooling is really valuable to a lot of businesses, because you just don't see that if you don't have an advocacy tool in place.
Yeah, I think it's really important, just thinking about even the engagement on their individual posts. Sometimes people will look and say, well, I haven't really got very many likes, or I haven't got any comments. But if you look at the other side and you're looking at that UTM and you're like, well, look at all the referral traffic, because there's so many people on social media that are silent. They don't actively like or comment, but they are clicking through and looking at your content. So that's really valuable. So it's always worth looking at both sides of the coins in terms of metrics.
That's really interesting to hear, actually, because I've probably seen this myself within our own program, but the content that tends to get the most engagement on social media in terms of reactions and comments and things like that isn't generally what generates the most clicks. If I think about it, when I'm browsing LinkedIn, I'll do the same thing. If somebody shares a URL, if I'm interested enough to click it, I'll click it. I don't typically then come back to the post and say, oh, I probably should do more of this, but really enjoyed this article, and just go on to explain what I enjoyed about it. I'll kind of click away, and then that will take my attention. Camilla, I'd love to understand how you kind of balance the employee needs and wants with the business needs, because obviously once you've realized what content is working, you mentioned about, contract wins and things like that, people-centric content tends to perform particularly well. But then, of course, like you've mentioned, when you're sharing URLs and more company-specific content, it tends to generate more business impact. So how are you balancing that when you're encouraging advocacy and when you're choosing what content to upload to the platform?
I think the good thing about advocacy is over, say, a corporate LinkedIn channel is that you naturally have the ability to upload more content. So previously, when everyone was thinking, we must get content out through the corporate channel, that's the only way, you're restricted because you have, a schedule and you don't want to be putting out lots and lots of posts a day. However, we have the freedom to create more content so we can be more flexible on our advocacy platform. And really, the more content, the better. I always want to make sure when people go on, they have something to choose rather than, they go on and then there's nothing. And then all of a sudden they maybe stop interacting with the tool. We obviously have our business objectives and strategy. So that is foremost, how we would go about creating content, but we also work closely with other pockets of the business. So as I said at the very beginning, we work in energy and materials markets. We work in lots of different parts of those markets, and some areas are a bit more niche than others. So we've definitely found in the past that certain areas of the business, it's not really beneficial for them to have anything in the corporate LinkedIn page because our followers are more traditional energy rather than, say, life sciences. So we would always encourage that audience to utilize our advocacy platform so that they can get that content out to the right people. So it's just striking the balance. We're always open to suggestions from the business, but we do obviously ultimately have our strategy in mind. I also have a resource that I can share with anyone at Wood that shows you where we would advise certain contents to go. So we would have a document that would say what would typically go on our corporate page versus advocacy and what you would maybe just share on your individual page as well. So I think that's quite useful guidance to share with people, because sometimes we do get people suggesting things for the program that is probably more that an individual or maybe one or two people would share. So we wouldn't add that onto advocacy. But if we see merit for a team of people to share, then we're more likely to add that onto our advocacy platform.
I love this way of thinking. Ultimately, it's about, the goal is to get employees to share first and foremost. And I think just making sure that the content is relevant to them and that they actually want to share it is obviously the best way to get or to achieve that result. Just as I suppose as a final thought or a final topic, I just wanted to hone in on what you were talking about earlier is with treating advocacy as a strategic channel, akin to a company page on LinkedIn. What would you say to social or comms teams who still see advocacy as a distribution add-on rather than a channel in its own right?
I think if you work in social media, you'll be, very aware of what is happening with the corporate pages in LinkedIn. And we know that the algorithm is making it more difficult for companies to get their message out there. So if you want to reach the right people in the right place, then you need to think about other ways to do that. And employee advocacy is the perfect opportunity for that. Not only because you're reaching the right people, but it also feeds into that authentic and trusted content, which is obviously, again, number one on social media at the moment. You're going to get people more likely to engage in your content if it's coming from an individual, because let's face it, people trust people than, more so than they do over brands. I would say it's worth looking into and maybe start thinking small, maybe pick a particular campaign, gather some people, and then measure the impact and the metrics. And then from there, you can then start to grow. Like I said earlier, with our UK graduate recruitment campaign, it was the results from that really helped solidify just how, important this channel was in its own right. And then we've been able to grow from there. So sometimes you just need a proof point that you can share with a wider team for things to take off.
As part of the sort of delineation between the two things, do you report on them independently as two kind of completely separate channels?
I do report on them as two separate channels, but if I'm creating a report based off a specific campaign, everything will be incorporated in that campaign, and I'll generally look at the impact. So for example, we can then compare how much traffic, for example, we got from LinkedIn versus advocacy versus our other channels as well. So I do typically report on them as individual, but just as you would with your individual social media channels, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important step as part of that. From my perspective, it's when businesses take that step to go, this isn't just bucketed social media impact, this is employee advocacy versus corporate page, or sort of organic and versus paid as an example. And I think the more you can start comparing those things, the more impactful and more visible the impact starts to become of advocacy. And to your point earlier, the more value you start to derive from it and the ability to kind of say, actually, we'd like to do more of this and do it bigger and spend more money and get more licenses to have a bigger impact.
So, Camilla, I have one final question for you, and this is something that I ask probably 90% of guests. You've already shared some pretty nice ones, but what's the biggest win that you've seen from employee advocacy? And this can be a company win or an employee's personal win.
I think the graduate recruitment campaign was pretty big. When I saw the stats that 82% of our traffic came from advocacy and it resulted in 13 times more traffic than a corporate LinkedIn, that was a light bulb moment for me. But out with that, getting the feedback from the advocates, it's maybe not as large scale as that, but understanding that it is helping them in their roles, that people are reaching out to them based off the content that they're sharing, that's really valuable as well. Starting conversations, as we said, people might not necessarily be engaging on their posts, but if they're reaching out to them and then wanting to discuss more about the solution or, what they're sharing, then I think that's really valuable from the business point of view. So seen it from both sides.
I love that. Yeah, that second part of your answer I think is fantastic. We haven't really touched upon it, but it's something that I think you've done exceptionally well with your program, is just keeping that line of communication open with your advocates, making yourself the person that they know that they can go to. And it's something that we encourage all the time. If we have any resources on this, we'll leave them in the show notes, but just keeping that feedback loop so that you can understand what's working, can continue to optimize is, everything that you should be doing from the moment that you launch an employee advocacy program, really. But Camilla, I wanted to say thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Time does fly by when we're having these conversations, and it feels like it's been too short almost, but we really appreciate you joining us. And hopefully we can have you on again soon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you in a week's time. Bye for now.